This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, the editor-in-chief at FanDuel and at NumberFire.com, and this is episode 217 of the Late Round Podcast, one of the many shows that are part of the NumberFire Podcast Network. Thanks for tuning in. So before I get to today's mailbag questions, I wanted to send a very, very special shout-out to my colleagues Jim Sonis and Brandon Gadula, because they both won Fantasy Sports Writers Association awards this past week. For those of you who don't know, the FSWA has awards each year for the best writers in the fantasy industry. The association gets a group of judges and they go through thousands of samples before naming the finalists and the winners. And Brandon won Golf Writer of the Year and Jim won Football Writer of the Year. The two of them have been at NumberFire for a while now, and their Heat Check podcast is another one that's part of our podcast network. But both of them have really worked hard and are very, very deserving of this recognition. And they're two guys that I'm lucky to work beside each and every day. So nothing but love to both Jim and Brandon, and a big, big congratulations. And with that, let's get to this week's questions. This first question is from Twitter from @PerfectPapa. Why did the Rams lose? I think they lost for a lot of reasons. At a high level, the biggest difference between what the Rams did and what the Patriots did is that the Patriots, as usual, were dynamic with their game plan. It's amazing how coaches don't automatically just do this. But Bill Belichick changes his schemes and plays a completely different style of ball depending on the matchup. Most other coaches just run their scheme and hope it beats the other team. And that's sort of what we saw from the Rams. LA didn't really adjust the offense to attack New England's weaknesses. I wrote about this in my preview of the game, but I fully expected Todd Gurley to be involved in the passing game in that Super Bowl matchup. New England had been great at getting pressure on the quarterback, and they were bad against pass-catching backs all year long. But when you watched the game, the running backs for the Rams were rarely the primary pass catchers on any given play. And since Goff was a little rattled, he wasn't strong getting through his progressions to eventually get the ball to his running back. Instead, he tossed it over to Anderson or Gurley too late, and a defender was already there. That was one example. There's also another good nugget from Warren Sharp, or @SharpFootball on Twitter, who noted that New England was really good against 11 personnel passing plays this year. And we know that's what the Rams love to run. But the Rams didn't switch that up in the Super Bowl. According to Warren, only 6 of their dropbacks came from 12 personnel, while 36 were from 11. And when you're in 12 personnel, you can utilize those tight ends as extra blockers if you want, which would help the pressure on Goff. I think that's really where the Rams screwed up. I thought LA's defense was actually pretty strong, all things considered. And I think that we can all agree that they lost because they didn't know what to do offensively. And it all came down to Sean McVay not altering his game plan enough for this particular matchup. This next question is from @Robbie T. Jones. Is Jerick McKinnon a buy, sell, or hold candidate in Dynasty right now? I don't think he's a sell when you look at his ADP, which is RB32 in startups. According to Dynasty League Football's ADP, last July, he was RB15. So he's dropped 17 spots at running back for missing the entire season due to injury. But yes, it's a little bit more than that, because in 2018, we saw how efficient and effective Matt Breida can be. Back before the season, Breida was viewed as a backup. Now all of a sudden, we're thinking that this backfield should be split. So for those of you who invested in McKinnon, it's not looking great. But I also don't think he's someone that you should be actively selling because Breida got banged up last year. It would make sense for them to split up that backfield. And it's a backfield that, despite playing with backup quarterbacks and really not great personnel, the running backs on San Francisco ranked 16th in success rate last year according to NumberFire's expected points model. That's not bad considering the situation that they were in. And it surely has to do with Kyle Shanahan and his ability to scheme. So the situation is right. It's a good situation for a running back. But I don't think that makes him a buy either, mostly because he has more of a cap ceiling now that we know what Matt Breida can do. The upside that people saw with McKinnon last season was that there wasn't as much in the way for touches. That's not the case anymore. Matt Breida exists. So I think that McKinnon can be an RB2 in PPR formats, but I have a hard time ever envisioning him being an RB1 unless an injury occurs. But I also do think that he'll be used a lot as a pass catcher, which will give him a nice floor in PPR. So overall, I think he's properly valued in Dynasty. That just means that he's a hold. This next question is from @FantasyBulldog. Non-fantasy football question. Taysom Hill accumulated an impressive laundry list of achievements offensively, defensively, and on special teams. His use offensively didn't pass the eye test, though. He seemed a luxury that only a juggernaut Saints team could persist with. Does the net expected points model bear that out? Yeah, so this is something that I would sort of analyze and keep track as the season went on. And this is where expected points models can be really cool and fun. So in 2018, Taysom Hill had a passing success rate of 37.5%. That's awful. That's terrible. but the sample size isn't very large at just 8 dropbacks. But I don't see the need to take the ball out of Drew Brees' hands when Drew Brees posted the 3rd best season by success rate since 2000. The rushing is where things get really interesting. Hill ran the ball 37 times for a success rate of almost 57%. His per rush expected points added was 0.25. That's incredibly high. And I mean, his success rate was incredibly high too. Now, Brees had a higher success rate and expected points per dropback rate than Hill had on the ground, but I don't think that necessarily means that they should have never used Taysom Hill the way that they used him. Now, I don't think that he should see a lot more work than he saw this past season, but my tune definitely started to change a little bit as the season went on, and I realized that when he touched the ball, it wasn't that much of a disaster, at least via the ground. This next question is an email from Mike. It says, I've got a question about the flex position / multiple flex spots. A while ago, you tweeted about the Tevin Coleman, Devontae Freeman backfield not sustaining both as top 24 running backs for the majority of their time together. But where does flex positions come into play? I have a dynasty league with 3 flex spots and was trying to figure out how far down the list of running backs and wide receivers were flex 3 worthy. Hope this makes sense. Hashtag thanks Sashi. Yes, thanks Sashi indeed. So I'll answer this at a very high level. When you have a lineup that has a ton of flexes or a ton of lineup spots, it makes these types of correlations less meaningful. Let's just pretend that you had a lineup with 3 flex spots and there was nothing else in that lineup. There were no other players. It would make little sense to use players from the same team or use 2 running backs from the same team because you know that they inherently cap each other's upside. Considering 3 lineup slots means most rosters are going to be loaded, you need that upside. But if there's a lineup that has 20 players, that matters a lot less, right? Because by the time you get to the 15th, 16th, 17th player in your lineup, you're looking at weak fantasy assets. So in that instance, it's totally fine to play a combo like Devontae Freeman and Tevin Coleman because you're not going to bench Tevin Coleman for some 3rd string running back. Now, the way this question was asked, I don't know if that's actually what you care about me answering. You may also be asking how you count players based on flex spots. A really easy way to do it is that if it's in a half PPR format where scoring is fairly equal at running back and wide receiver, just cut the flex spots in half when counting. In other words, you go top 12 running backs for RB1, top 24 for RB2, and then top 30 when you're trying to figure out flex options. So top 30 running backs would be all RB1s and RB2s and all flex running backs. But do note that as you get deeper and deeper, scoring becomes a lot flatter at these positions. There's not going to be some significant difference between a low-end RB3 and like a high-end RB5. It's kind of hard to articulate that, so hopefully it makes sense and doesn't sound like a 5-year-old is trying to explain fantasy football. This next question is from @wob429. Is Julian Edelman so good that he should be the first active player to ever be inducted into the Hall of Fame? So I partially wanted to put this on today's show because it's hilarious, but also to just say that it makes absolutely 0 sense for Julian Edelman to be in the Hall of Fame. Now, I mentioned this on Twitter this week, but if you want an easy reason to not put him in, just look at Hines Ward. As of today, and obviously Edelman has time to add to his stats, but as of today, Hines Ward has far more than double the number of receiving yards compared to Edelman. He scored 85 to 30 regular season touchdowns, and he has more than double the number of receptions. And then all the while, Ward won 2 Super Bowls and has a Super Bowl MVP. And he's actually made a Pro Bowl. He made 4 of them, and he was second team All-Pro 3 times. Julian Edelman has never even made a Pro Bowl. And even though Ward's playoff numbers aren't as strong as Edelman's, they're still really good. And Hines Ward may not make the Hall of Fame. Plenty of people think that he's not deserving. But you want Julian Edelman to get in based on the playoffs? Part of playoff statistics are luck-driven because you've got to be fortunate to even play in the playoffs in the first place. The Patriots aren't a dynasty strictly because of Julian Edelman. They're not playing all these playoff games because Julian Edelman is that good of a wide receiver. So basically, part of the argument for Edelman going to the Hall of Fame is indirectly wide receiver wins, which is a completely ludicrous thing. I always get sucked into these ridiculous narratives and I hate myself for it. But I at least wanted to share my point of view on why Edelman to the Hall of Fame is absolutely insane right now. I think it's fine that he has a place in history for what he's done as a clutch receiver, but that doesn't make him Hall of Fame worthy. This next question is from @Suna1. What is it that makes coaches not embrace analytics? Do you think a time management coach will be a norm in the league? Why do you think coaches choose to not actively exploit weaknesses in other defenses / more effective play calling? Example, running back targets versus the Patriots / play action. Look, I don't know how much each team is using analytics. I know which teams do and don't to a certain extent, but I don't think it would be fair for me to come on this show and say that the Rams lost the Super Bowl because they didn't embrace analytics. I do think there's always going to be pushback with analytics in football, though, for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, it's hard to measure. You're never going to get absolute answers like you can get in baseball with numbers. And that's a big turnoff for a lot of people because they don't know how to think in a probability-driven way. I also think another reason is just what this game is. It's a physical game. It's a punishing game. And with that, you get personalities who see analytics as nerdy. They don't want nerds taking over the game. Now, it's stupid and silly to us, but this idea is thrown around all the time by ex-players and fans. And I think coaches then feel the sense of not being in control when they're not making decisions based on feel. I think anyone would feel that way when you've done something your whole life and that something is then being questioned. So I think that's why analytics won't ever be fully embraced. But to be clear, teams do have people helping coaches know when to go for it, when not to go for it, all of those situations. It's not like we're living in a football world like it was in 1974. The game has definitely evolved, and the thinking around the game has too. This next question is from @DeanSunToast. You said today that you prioritize running backs in rookie dynasty drafts over trades for the position. Is this at the expense of other positions or if they fall to you? Maybe I should just rephrase what I said. In most of my dynasty leagues, I have more holes at running back than at wide receiver, but that's on purpose. It's because of longevity and the fact that I know that I can get more immediate production from running backs in rookie drafts. But you should also adjust your draft strategy based on your roster. Let me give you an example. I ended up taking DJ Moore at the 105 spot last year in a rookie draft, despite there being good running backs on the board. I had the 105 and the 108, and I knew that I wasn't totally set at wide receiver. Instead of risking missing out on DJ Moore, I snagged him with that first pick because I knew that I could choose the leftover running back at 108. And that was usually Kerryon Johnson. So I got DJ Moore and Kerryon Johnson instead of having to choose the running back at 105 and then risking not having DJ Moore, who I thought was a top wide receiver in the class. So there's no one way to do things. I just made that comment because it's generally how things go for me. This last question is from @AFCCB1079. That's quite the Twitter handle. Just listen to your buy and sell dynasty pods. One quick question. Where do you stand on Robert Woods in dynasty? Woods is another one of those guys who I love as a player, but I could see him as a sell candidate. I almost actually put him on the sell show. And it has everything to do with cost. Literally everything. DLF's ADP has Woods at wide receiver 15. He's ahead of Kenny Golladay, AJ Green, T.Y. Hilton, Corey Davis, Jarvis Landry. He's ahead of a lot of really good wide receivers. And while I can sort of understand that ADP, I think you're buying close to his ceiling. The Rams are going to spread the ball around with Sean McVay there. And when Cooper Kupp is back, Woods isn't going to be playing in the slot like he was in the second half of 2018. And he's never going to be the Rams' unquestioned number one wide receiver. So his upside of being an elite asset just isn't there. And you can't say that about someone like Kenny Golladay. So like I said, I can understand why people would be drafting him there, but I'd prefer to have a little bit more true upside out of that spot, especially if you're in win now mode and you can get someone like AJ Green instead. That's going to do it for today's show. Thanks to everyone for listening. If you've got to subscribe to the Late Round Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it on iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, TuneIn, Stitcher, and Spotify. And I'm also on Twitter @LateRoundQB. You can ask mailbag questions there, or you can email me at jj@numberfire.com. Thanks for listening, everyone. Hope you enjoy your weekend.